Hello and welcome to sim.bc, where it right now is 17:24 in the afternoon/evening there somewhere, depends on how you see it, right? It's a perspective, mates. Is it the afternoon or is it the evening? And today, mates, have been one of those days that I wish that I didn't have a topic to go on, right? Today is one of those days when I wish I hadn't announced yesterday what I was going to talk about, because today is the day I didn't need to have a topic, because so many things has happened. And most people are going to sit there and be like, what? Many things in like, how? It's just your normal life, right? What has happened? Well, I'm going to just run you through it, right? Because we're going to get into them questions. So, woke up this morning and I had a nosebleed. Thought I was going to die? Well, I didn't. It was just a regular nosebleed. I finished my song and published it, so it is in the description below, mates. You can find the recently published song, my original track, right? Just an instrumental. I was thinking about adding some vocals until I recorded it, and it's always one of those things when you think you really are good at something, and then you do it, review it, and you realize that maybe I should change my career. Not that this was ever my career, right? But I was just thinking that, oh, I'm pretty good at singing. And then I recorded it for real, right? And listed it in a enclosed environment where it was only my voice and I had nothing to like blame the bad things on. And I was just like, is this really what I sound like? I mean, is it really? Is it really? Yeah, so there were no vocals on that. And I know that I could have worked on it, but there are so many things that I want to do on the piano, because I realized that it was quite easy to, not easy, but it was easy to transfer what I was playing to the soundboard, or to the computer. So more of those are coming, mates. More of those are coming. I'm looking at one every quarter. That's the goal. One every quarter. That seems reasonable, right? Already met the first one now. But yeah, so link for that is in the description below. But that's not why you're here today, is it? Even though maybe it's because of me, You need to hope, right? You need to put some faith in yourself, right? But no, it's probably about all of them questions. And as per usual, mate, going to start off with moving myself around, which I failed at, even though I've done it like 100 times now. But we're going to start off reviewing what we've done so far. So, start off with tips and tricks for making an in-between question that is not too hard and not too easy, and is interesting to your audience. As we have stated a countless number of times at this point, we know that people tend to drift both in and out of conversation when not feeling engaged, which makes them having a harder time understanding the context in which a question is asked or stated, and hence making said question a harder experience, even though it objectively, based on the other people in the room, might have been an easy one, right? So asking necessary questions in order to keep audience engagement is one thing, but it is also needs to be kept short and simple. Not short in the sense of a short discussion, but rather that the question takes 15 to 30 seconds to formulate and not 10 minutes. And simple, not in the way that it should be an easy question, but in the sense that it should have an objective to answer instead of 15 different ones. So one objective to seek out. Ask direct questions, not aggressively direct, not abstractly indirect, but direct enough so that your audience knows what answer you are looking for. Because if they don't, then they might think that the question is excessively hard or too easy based on the miscommunication between the speaker and the subject, which will be your audience in this case. Posing one question at a time can help you as a lecturer to control the development of the discussion while simultaneously engaging the audience through their own interaction in the forms of answers. Plus, since the discussion will be broken up into different voices taking part, it's less likely for someone to drift out or completely fall asleep, mates, during a presentation of a subject. Whew, yeah, that was the short, so to say, conclusion of what we've done over the last couple of videos. But today we're moving into avoid leading and biased questions. Why would you do that? I mean, really, you should not do that, should you? I mean, if I say you shouldn't eat blueberries, should you now? Or if I say you shouldn't eat strawberries, should you now? Strawberries are red and that is bad, right? You see the bias in the question here? You see the leading in my question? I'm kind of leading and trying to direct where we're going with the conversation, even though people are just standing there and thinking like, this is just a regular old question. It's probably just an innocent question, right? But I'm already having in the back of my mind, right? In the back of my head, I'm having an idea of where I want this conversation to be going. So therefore, I'm trying to lead the conversation there by using leading and biased questions. This is also used in order to control the environment because you don't want it to get out of hand. Maybe if you're a lecturer and you're standing there looking out over your class, you don't always want to say, what is the environment? Or maybe you're discussing if the environment is good or bad. Maybe you want to say, the environment is good, isn't it? That is a question, but it simultaneously controls the room in saying that I have introduced my opinion through a question and asked you for confirmation or denial about this opinion, so to say, which I think is brilliant. And there is an art to this. It's not easy as stating a leading or biased question, even though many people, I would argue most people, think that this is what is happening all the time. Why? Well, because we're seeing politicians, mates. We're seeing politicians everywhere. And what is a good politician doing? You know, except for like stating outrageous claims and outrageous things day in, day after each other, right? Not mentioning any names here, but I can mention a nation, right? A united one. Anyway, mates. But what a good politician can do is make a biased question without making it seem biased, or making a leading question without showing people that it is leading, but it is actually leading. That is, I would argue, a sign of a good leader, someone who can get everybody on board because they have the social skills to ask questions and interact with other people's questions, but pose their own questions in such a way that they're controlling and leading the discussion in a certain direction. And simultaneously, it might change the entire idea of what we're talking about, because you might go in there, let's say that we're two people, me and Gary, right? Me, main mate. Gary is coming in here and he is very opposed to, what you would say, he's very opposed to water bottles, because since we're using it as a subject and it's debranded and all, we can use it, right? And Gary's coming in and he's saying, well, I'm very opposed to water bottles. I think they're bad for the environment, right? I think that we should reuse the same ones that I'm currently doing because, you know, good for environment. But let's just say for argument's sake that he's against it and I'm for. And I'm saying like, no, we should buy more. That's a good thing. Then maybe I can ask and state questions like, well, water bottles are good, aren't they? And I know that this isn't the best example of a biased and leading question without the other person knowing it, because that's quite obvious. But things that are more like, I'm stating my opinion in a question, but not specifically stating to the other person that this is my opinion. I'm just saying that this is true now, isn't it? Or kind of leading the undertone to say that this is what I think is correct, even though I'm stating it as a question. So when you interact with it, you're kind of in the, what you would say, you're trying to put the other party at a disadvantage, because when you state in the question, you already want the question to be stated in such a way that they're going to fight your opinion at the same time. But a good, very good person can make a biased and leading question that is making the leading question stand up here and the the person who's supposed to answer be down here. And if they answer it with their opinion, since you have not clearly stated that this is your opinion, and they start arguing against you, they will look like a complete maniac, right? And I'm sure that you have been in these types of situations before. I can't come up with one on the top of my head here, but many times I'm feeling like, this person is me on the ropes, right? Because they have stated a question or they've stated something in such a way that if I am challenging it, I will look mental. But if I don't, the entire mentality of the room will be changed. And here is where many people are arguably not so sensitive, I'm not gonna say bad, right, but not so sensitive to personal connections, start making these outrageous claims, or it will at least look like outrageous claims to the rest of the people in the room, whilst the person on the other hand is just going to be like, I won this because I stated the question and you answered it with your opinions, but nobody in here understood except you and me, because we're on the opposite sides of the spectrum of this discussion, that you actually answered my opinion. The other people will just think that that's mental. Why did he or she just blow up from no reason? It was only a question, right? And that's kind of the art to it. You want to make a question that gets people on board and that people can't really argue against, because if they do, it will be such a small thing, right? The subliminal message in the question should be so small and so vague, but still controlling, leading, and showing off a direction of the conversation that nobody can actively act against it if they're not good at the same thing, because then they can make subliminal questions that are leading and biased to try and change the room back. But it's something that I think is really interesting, and as a lecturer you should be able to do this. You should be able to show off your perspective of the matter at hand, and I know that most students would argue that it would be better if we just have an objective way, right? An objective way of learning, and I would tend to agree. But at some point, I would just say that it would be kind of good if the room, so to say, if you read the room as a lecturer and you realize that your audience is kind of drifting away or start drifting away, that you make these kind of questions that will make you get back on track, yet again controlling the thing. But yet again, this is all about avoiding leading and biased questions. No matter how good I think that they are, this is about avoiding them, because if you avoid these things altogether, you will not have these people who are standing in the back of the room challenging your concept, challenging you, and be seen as a total mental maniac in comparison to you, which is unfair. Because if you're going to discuss a question fairly, right, you want to be able to discuss it in such a way that both parties are coming out on top, that both parties are seen as equally good, right? And then people can argue that, well, their perspective isn't equally as good here, but their argumentation might be the same. Their argumentation might be equally as good, but just that what they're arguing for isn't good. So you should avoid these biased questions, especially if you are a lecturer. Objectively, you should, because, well, it leads to a more objective way of viewing the subject. It introduces more perspectives to it. But yet again, you can see that I'm quite biased about what I think about these types of questions. I think that a really good politician, or someone who's just a popular leader, so to say, a leader by choice within a group of people, is someone who is either actively or unconsciously good at these types of things, because they can change the direction of the entire group. Now, yet again, this sometimes makes people feel like the other people in the groups, let's say, feels like they can't really challenge the authority of the popular leader, because it's the popular leader, and yet again you will look like a maniac if you do, because there is actually nothing to actually challenge. There's nothing concrete in the room, but there are so many small things that have been building up over time that can make people frustrated, and it will lead to bad things. So you should avoid this, right? You should. I'm saying this, right? In the end, you should avoid leading and biased questions, because it does not only introduce more perspectives to the group if you do not do this, but it also avoids this idea of having two different parties screaming at each other, and the rest of the people in the room is just standing and thinking like, that person is right, that person is wrong, even though both might be equally wrong. You see what I'm saying here? This is kind of an abstract concept in my opinion. I am sure that many people will say like, this is super concrete, this is leading, this is biased. But in my opinion, it says a thin line there between being good and being bad. And when they say avoid it, I understand where they're coming from, but still I'm thinking that, well, in some situations it's kind of good actually. Just going to state as well that we have gone through this, and there is another video about this as well, about orientational questions when it came to different types of questions, even though right now we're discussing making it easy or hard, and you want to have it in between there. And one can argue that by not having biased questions, you're leading it more into the middle ground, because more perspectives are introduced slowly, right? Slowly into the conversation, because they're being born, they're being played off each other, and that will introduce more perspectives in comparison to if you had a biased opinion in the beginning and there is not that much of a discussion, because you've kind of already stated what is correct and what is not. Yet again, saying strawberries are bad, aren't they? Well, there's not much of a discussion there, because even though people can't just argue against it like directly, it's hard to introduce no new concept of saying that it's neutral, that it's good, when you've already introduced the idea in the question that's saying it's bad. Anyway, that was everything for me today, mates. Tomorrow we're going to speak about your respondent's language, or rather speak your respondent's language. And we have talked about this for quite a while, and quite a lot, a substantial amount of time, but it's something that I think is really interesting. Yet again, these two parts, probably easily no, it's actually not. I've added another one. These are two of the most important and most interesting parts, I think, when it comes to making a good question. Anyway, have a nice one, mates, and I'll see you tomorrow.